Otis was 37 years old, made $67,000 a year operating a colossal gantry crane at Norfolk's Lambert's Point terminal. And on Friday morning at 6:47 a.m., his 7-year marriage was detonated by a single sentence. The rain, a miserable gray sheet, slid down the floor-to-ceiling windows of their rented apartment in Ghent, the kind of place Yolanda called a statement. It cost them $2,200 a month, a figure that felt like a stone in Otis's gut every time the rent was due. The apartment was all glass and steel, with cool white walls and minimalist furniture that had cost a fortune but offered zero comfort. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom for a life he wasn't sure he was actually living. The argument had started, as it often did, over money. Specifically, his father's money, or what was left of it. A small 2-bedroom bungalow in Ocean View, fully paid off, sitting a few blocks from the Chesapeake Bay. It was where Otis grew up. It was where he'd watched his father, David, a retired longshoreman, tend to his tomato plants in the small backyard until his hands, gnarled from a lifetime of hard labor, could no longer hold the trowel. "It's just sitting there, Otis," Yolanda said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She was standing by the $3,800 stainless steel refrigerator, wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than his monthly car payment. Her hair, a masterpiece of intricate twists, was pulled back, emphasizing the severe, disappointed line of her mouth. "The market in Ocean View is hot right now. We could get $200,000 for that little shack, maybe more. That's a down payment. A real down payment on a real house. Here, in Ghent." "It's not a shack, Yolanda. It's my father's house," Otis said, his voice low. He was sitting at their sleek, white quartz island, his coffee untouched in a heavy ceramic mug. He was still in his work pants and a faded t-shirt, the scent of the port already clinging to him from yesterday's shift. He felt perpetually tired, a deep-in-the-bones weariness that coffee couldn't touch. "Your father is gone," she said, the words clipped and devoid of sympathy. "He's been gone for 2 years. Holding on to that place is not going to bring him back. It's just morbid and financially irresponsible." Every word felt like a small, calculated jab. He'd heard them all before. The house was a shack. His sentimentality was morbid. His financial sense was irresponsible. He looked at her. This beautiful woman he had married, her deep brown skin glowing even in the gloomy morning light, and felt a chasm opening between them. A chasm that had been widening for years. He just hadn't wanted to look down. "We don't need the money," he said quietly. "We're doing okay." Yolanda laughed. It was a brittle, ugly sound. "Okay, Otis, you make $67,000 a year. That's not okay in 2024. That's scraping by. I want a life, not just an existence. I want a home we own, not this glass box we're pouring money into. I want to travel somewhere other than Virginia Beach for a weekend. My job is good. It's steady. It has a pension," he offered, the words sounding weak even to his own ears. It was his trump card, the thing that was supposed to make his modest salary worth it, the promise of a secure future. Yolanda's face twisted into a sneer of pure, undiluted contempt. The polished facade she presented to the world, the charming wife of the hard-working port operator, crumbled into dust right there in their expensive kitchen. "The pension?" she scoffed, turning her back to him to open the refrigerator, as if the conversation was already beneath her. "That's all you ever talk about. 10 years. Another 3 years of this mediocrity, and we get a piece of your precious pension. That was the deal, wasn't it?" Otis froze. "The deal? What are you talking about?" "We're married." She finally turned to face him fully, her silk robe falling open slightly. Her expression was cold, her eyes hard as stones. And then she said it. The words his father had warned him about. The words that would act as a key to a lock he never knew existed. "I never loved you," Yolanda said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. "I never have." The world went silent. The sound of the rain, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant city traffic, it all vanished. All Otis could hear was that sentence, echoing in the sudden vast emptiness of his life. And in that echo, another voice emerged, his father's voice, raspy and weak from his hospital bed 2 years ago, but filled with a terrible certainty. "Son, there's a tape in the blue Nike shoebox in my closet. I hope you never have a reason to listen to it. But if she ever says she never loved you, you play that tape. You play it right away." Otis had thought his father was delusional, his mind clouded by medication and illness. He'd thought it was just David's old-fashioned mistrust of a woman he felt was too slick for his simple son. Otis had dismissed it, packed the shoebox away with his father's other meager belongings, and tried to forget. But he hadn't forgotten. And as he stared at the woman who had just invalidated their entire life together, he understood. His father had seen it. He had seen the truth all along. Have you ever had a moment where the entire foundation of your world turned out to be a lie? Tell us about it in the comments. We know how devastating that can be, but we also know it can be the beginning of finding your own strength. The memory of his father in those final months was a collage of antiseptic smells, beeping machines, and David's own stubborn pride. David had refused to leave his bungalow, the small house on 12th View Street that he'd bought for $19,000 in 1983 and had paid off a decade ahead of schedule. It was his castle. The worn armchair, the mismatched plates, the framed photo of Otis's mother, who had passed when Otis was just a boy. It was the entire repository of their family history. When David got sick, Otis spent every spare hour there, driving from the sterile apartment in Ghent back to the lived-in comfort of Ocean View. He'd cook, clean, and just sit with his dad, watching old westerns on a television that was at least 20 years old. Yolanda rarely joined him. "It's just so depressing over there," she'd say, scrolling through her phone on their $2,500 sectional sofa. "And it smells like old people." Otis would flinch but say nothing. He'd make excuses for her. "She's just not good with sickness, Dad," he'd explain, as he helped his father take his pills. David, his deep brown skin looking thin and papery under the lamplight, would just grunt. "Sickness ain't the problem, son. Character is." During one of those long afternoons, about a year into their marriage and 5 years before David passed, Yolanda had made a scene about his work clothes. Otis had come straight from the port, his $45 Carhartt jacket and steel-toed boots covered in a fine layer of grime. He'd been in a hurry to get to his dad's. "Can you please not wear that in here?" Yolanda had said, wrinkling her nose as he walked into their Ghent apartment. "You're tracking port filth all over my floors. Go straight to the laundry room and leave those disgusting boots outside the door." He had felt a hot flush of shame. He worked hard. It was honest work, difficult work, maneuvering containers the size of small buildings with a precision that few men possessed. The grime was a part of it, but to her it was just filth. He started changing in the locker room at the port, bagging his work clothes like they were hazardous waste before he came home, just to keep the peace. The peace was a fragile, expensive thing. Yolanda had a taste for objects that came with heavy price tags. A $3,000 trip to Aruba for their second anniversary, which he'd reluctantly put on a credit card. It took him 18 months to pay it off, the interest payments a constant, nagging reminder. While they were there, surrounded by turquoise water and white sand, she seemed happy. She'd post photos on social media, tagging them, "living our best life." But the happiness evaporated the moment they landed back in Norfolk. When his father's health took a serious turn, the financial and emotional strain grew. The co-pays for specialists, the cost of prescription drugs, the home health aide he hired for a few hours a day, it all added up. Yolanda saw it as money being siphoned away from their future. "Have you looked into facilities?" she asked one night over a dinner of takeout sushi that had cost $75. "There are some very nice ones. It would be better for him. He'd have round-the-clock care, and it would be less of a burden on us." "A burden?" Otis repeated, the word tasting like poison. "He's my father." "And we are your future," she countered smoothly. "We have to be practical, Otis. That house of his has equity. We could use it to pay for a really top-tier place for him, and the rest could go towards our own home." He saw the cold logic in her eyes. It was a transaction. Liquidate the asset, cover the expense, pocket the profit. There was no room for love or history in her equation. He refused flatly. The arguments grew worse after that. She began to openly mock his devotion. "Going to play nursemaid to your dad again?" she'd ask as he grabbed his keys. It was during this time, in the last year of David's life, that the subject of the pension began to surface more and more. At first, it was subtle. "How long have you been at the port now, baby?" she asked one evening, rubbing his shoulders as he sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted. "Almost 8 years, he'd said. "Wow. So, in just a couple more years, you hit the big one?" "Oh," she'd murmured, her voice like honey. "That's when the pension really locks in, right? The 10-year mark for, what's it called, community property?" He hadn't thought much of it then. He just nodded. "Yeah, I guess." But she brought it up again and again. It became a running joke. On their 7th anniversary, she'd toasted him with a glass of champagne that cost $90 a bottle. "To 7 years down, and only 3 to go until we're golden," she'd said with a wink. He'd laughed, but a cold knot had formed in his stomach. It didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a countdown. The cruelty became more blatant. She'd belittle his job in front of her friends, a circle of women who all had husbands in finance or law. "Oh, Otis? He does something very physical at the port," she'd say with a dismissive wave of her hand. "He pulls levers all day. But it's steady." The feigned enthusiasm was more insulting than outright scorn. He remembered one particularly brutal fight just a few months before his father passed away. Yolanda had bought a Burberry trench coat, a classic piece that cost $2,400. She'd modeled it for him, expecting praise. He'd just stared at it, thinking of the mounting medical bills, of the fact he'd been working overtime shifts just to stay afloat. "How could you buy this right now?" he'd asked, his voice tight with a stress that was threatening to crack him in two. "Because I deserve to have nice things," she'd shouted, her face contorted with rage. "I am tired of sacrificing. I am tired of living this small life, waiting for you to catch up. I am married to a man who smells like diesel fuel and whose greatest ambition is a pension he won't even see for another 30 years. The words had struck him like a physical blow. He had retreated into himself, burying the hurt under a mountain of work and responsibility. He told himself she was just stressed. He told himself she didn't mean it. He told himself they were in a rough patch and that love would see them through. He had no idea how wrong he was. Love had nothing to do with it. It was about a week after that fight that his father, looking smaller than ever in his hospital bed, had given him the tape. David had been lucid that day, his eyes clear and sharp. "Otis, come here," he'd rasped. Otis had leaned in close, the smell of rubbing alcohol and sickness filling his senses. "I need you to listen to me," David said, his hand, all bone and sinew, gripping Otis's forearm with surprising strength. "I'm not going to be around much longer. I need to know you'll be okay." "I'll be okay, Dad." "No. You listen. That woman. Yolanda. He paused, taking a ragged breath. She's not what you think. I tried to tell you. You wouldn't hear it. A man in love is a deaf man. Otis started to protest, but his father held up a hand. No talk. Just listen. In my closet at the house, there's a blue Nike shoebox. On the top shelf, inside there's a cassette tape. It's sealed in an envelope. A tape? Dad, what are you talking about? I'm talking about your future, David said, his eyes boring into Otis's. I did something I'm not proud of. But I'd do it again to protect my boy. I recorded her. She was at the house, talking to her Auntie May on the phone. She didn't know I was in the next room. She was bragging. The memory was so vivid, it felt like it was happening right now. The hum of the hospital machines, the weight of his father's words, the confusion and disbelief Otis felt. I want you to take that tape, David had commanded. Don't listen to it. Put it somewhere safe. I hope to God you never need it. I hope I'm just a crazy old man and you two live happily ever after. But hope ain't a plan, son. If the day ever comes, if she ever looks you in the eye and tells you she never loved you, you play that tape. You understand me? Dad? Do you understand me, Otis? Yes, Dad, Otis had whispered, his throat thick. I understand. He had retrieved the box after his father's funeral. He'd found the envelope, a standard white number 10 business envelope, with the flap glued shut. On the front, in his father's shaky cursive, it just said, "For Otis, when you need it." He had held it in his hands, feeling the hard, rectangular shape of the cassette inside. He'd been tempted to break the seal, to listen and prove his father wrong, but he couldn't. It felt like a betrayal. So he'd put it in the back of his own hall closet behind old photo albums and winter coats, and he'd tried to build a life with the woman his father had so gravely misjudged, or so he had believed, until this morning. Back in the glass and steel kitchen, the silence stretched, thin and taut. Yolanda was still standing by the refrigerator, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes now. She had expected him to yell, to break down, to plead. She had not expected this dead, empty calm. "What?" she said, trying to regain her footing. "What's that look on your face?" Otis didn't answer. He pushed himself away from the island, his movements slow and deliberate, like a man moving underwater. He walked past her, out of the kitchen, and down the short hallway to the closet. He could feel her eyes on his back. He opened the door. The smell of cedar and stored fabric washed over him. He reached past the hanging coats, his fingers searching for the familiar shape of the Nike box on the top shelf. He found it, pulled it down. Dust puffed into the air. He carried it back to the kitchen and set it on the quartz island. Yolanda stared at the box, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What is that? More junk from your father's house?" He opened the lid. Inside were a few of his father's things, his old port ID, a tie clip, a small worn Bible, and on top, the sealed white envelope. He picked it up. "For Otis, when you need it." Today was the day he needed it. He slid his finger under the flap and broke the seal. The sound of the tearing paper was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Inside was a standard cassette tape, the kind he hadn't seen in years. On the label, in the same shaky cursive, was a date, June 14th, 2018. On the kitchen counter, next to the sleek, modern coffee maker, sat an old JVC boombox. It was another relic from his father's house, one of the few things Otis had insisted on keeping. It was ugly and clunky, a black plastic beast from the 1990s. Yolanda hated it. "It ruins the whole aesthetic," she'd complained, but it had a cassette player, and Otis had kept it for the box of old mixtapes from his youth. He had never imagined he would use it for this. He walked over to the boombox, the cassette held between his thumb and forefinger. Yolanda watched him, a dawning horror on her face. "Otis? What are you doing? What is that?" He didn't look at her. He pushed the eject button. The cassette door opened with a soft, mechanical sigh. He slotted the tape inside and pushed the door shut. His finger hovered over the play button. "Otis, don't," she said, her voice rising, a note of panic creeping in. "Whatever that is, just stop. We can talk. I was just angry. I didn't mean it." He looked at her then. He saw the lie plain as day on her beautiful face, the desperate, scrambling attempt to put the mask back on. But it was too late. The mask was shattered. He pressed play. The button clicked down with a heavy, final sound. There was a long moment of tape hiss, a sound from a forgotten era. It filled the sterile kitchen with a fuzzy, analog warmth that felt entirely out of place. And then, a voice. Her voice. "No, Auntie May, you're not listening." Yolanda's voice from 5 years ago said, sounding bright and conspiratorial. There was the faint sound of a spoon clinking against a teacup. She must have been in his father's kitchen. "It's a plan, a long-term plan." Otis watched Yolanda's face. The color drained from it. Her skin, moments ago so luminous, turned a pasty, ashen gray. Her mouth fell open. Another voice, older and more cautious, crackled through the small speakers. Her Auntie May. "Yolanda, baby, that don't sound right. The man is good to you." "Good doesn't pay the bills, Auntie," the recorded Yolanda replied with a dismissive laugh. "Good doesn't buy a house in Ghent. Good doesn't get you a BMW. Look, he's a simple man. He works hard, he's steady, and most important, he has that port pension. It's one of the best in the state, but you have to be married for 10 years to get a claim on it in a divorce. 10 years. That's the magic number." The real Yolanda, the one standing in front of him, staggered back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. A small, strangled sound escaped her lips. Auntie May's voice was full of disbelief. "So you're just going to stay with him for 10 years and then leave? Yolanda, that's cold." "It's not cold, it's smart," the voice on the tape insisted, confident and unshakable. "I'm 30 years old. I give him my 30s, and I'm set for life by the time I'm 40. His pension is projected to be worth almost $1 million by the time he retires. Half of that is mine. $400,000, $500,000. Tax-free in a settlement. For that kind of money, I can be a loving wife for a few more years. It's an investment. The old man, his father, he's already sick. He won't last much longer, God rest his soul. And once he's gone, I can convince Otis to sell that dump of a house, and we can at least live a little better while I'm waiting out the clock." The clinking of the spoon stopped. There was a pause. "He can never know, of course," the recorded voice continued, dropping to a near whisper. "He's sweet. He actually thinks this is real. He thinks I love him. It's almost sad. But I can't afford to be sad. I have to be strategic." Auntie May sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to travel across the years. "And what if you get caught?" Yolanda's recorded laughter was sharp and certain. "Caught? How am I going to get caught? It's not like I wrote it down. It's just a conversation between you and me. Who's ever going to know?" The tape kept running, but the voices were gone. There was only the sound of the clinking spoon again, and then a faint shuffling sound, probably David moving in the other room. And then the unmistakable click of a recorder being stopped. The hiss returned, filling the kitchen. It was the only sound. Otis let it play for a full 30 seconds, the white noise scrubbing the air clean. Yolanda stood frozen, her eyes wide with a terror he had never seen before. She looked from the boombox to his face and back again. She looked like a cornered animal. Finally, Otis reached out and pressed the stop button. The click was as loud as a gunshot in the dead silence. He looked at her, his face a perfect, unreadable mask. He felt nothing, not rage, not sadness, not even betrayal anymore. All the emotion had been burned out of him, leaving only a cold, clear certainty. He felt like one of his cranes, immense, powerful, and utterly detached, ready to do the work that needed to be done. "I have to go to work," he said, his voice as flat and gray as the morning sky. He turned and walked out of the kitchen. He could hear her ragged breathing behind him. He went into their bedroom, the one with the king-sized bed and the expensive high-thread count sheets that had always felt cold to him. He stripped off his t-shirt and pants and began to get dressed for his shift. Clean socks, his work-issued pants, a sturdy cotton shirt. He moved with an economy of motion, his actions precise and automatic. Yolanda appeared in the doorway, her face a mess of disbelief and panic. Otis, say something." He pulled on his heavy work boots, the ones she called disgusting, and methodically tied the laces. Double knotted, just like his father taught him. "We need to talk about this," she said, her voice trembling. That was years ago. I was a different person. Your father, he hated me. He must have tricked me. He must have—" Her words tumbled out, a frantic search for an excuse, a narrative that could somehow undo what had just been done. Otis stood up. He grabbed his wallet from the $800 dresser and his keys from the small ceramic bowl next to it. He walked towards the door, towards her. For a second, she seemed to think he was coming to her, to hold her, to comfort her. A flicker of hope crossed her face, but he just walked past her, not even grazing her silk robe. "Otis, please," she cried, grabbing his arm. Her touch felt alien, a stranger's hand on his skin. "Don't just leave. Where are you going?" He stopped and looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up to her face. "I told you," he said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "I'm going to work." He gently removed her hand from his arm and walked out of the bedroom. She followed him, her pleading turning to anger. "You can't just play some ancient tape and walk away. This is our life. 7 years, Otis. You're just going to throw away 7 years?" He paused at the front door of the apartment, his hand on the doorknob. He turned to look at her one last time. She was standing in the middle of their perfect, sterile living room, the picture of desperation. The expensive furniture seemed to mock her. "You threw them away," he said. "Not me." And then he opened the door and walked out, closing it softly behind him. The click of the latch was the final sound. He didn't take the elevator. He took the stairs, his heavy boots echoing in the concrete stairwell. He needed the movement, the rhythm, the feeling of solid ground beneath his feet. By the time he reached the parking garage, the rain had lessened to a fine mist. He got into his car, a 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it. The car was paid for. It was his. The interior smelled faintly of coffee and the salt air from the port. It smelled like his life, his real life. He sat for a long moment, his hands on the steering wheel, just breathing. The numbness was beginning to recede, and a deep, cold anger was taking its place. It wasn't a hot, explosive rage. It was a slow-burning, methodical fury. The fury of a man who had been played for a fool, not for a night, but for nearly a decade. He thought of the sacrifices, the overtime shifts, the credit card debt for her vacations, the shame he'd felt about his job, his clothes, his father's house. He thought of his father dying, trying to protect him from beyond the grave. The plan wasn't a plan. It was an investment. 7 years. For a payout. He was a stock she was waiting to cash in. His phone buzzed. It was Yolanda. He ignored it. It buzzed again. A text message. "Otis, come back. We can fix this." He deleted it without a second thought. Another call. He silenced his phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. He started the car and pulled out of the parking garage. leaving the sleek glass tower of their life behind him. He didn't drive towards Lambert's Point. Not yet. He drove towards Ocean View. He needed to go home. The real one. The drive took 20 minutes. He parked in front of the small bungalow. It looked a little neglected, the paint peeling in a few spots, a couple of weeds pushing through the cracks in the walkway. But it was solid. It was real. It was his. He got out of the car and just stood on the sidewalk looking at it. This was what she called a shack, a dump. This was the house built with his father's sweat and his mother's love. It was worth more than every sterile, overpriced object in that Ghent apartment combined. He pulled his phone out. He didn't call Yolanda. He called his union rep, a man named Marcus, who had been at the port for 30 years. "Marcus, it's Otis," he said, when the man answered. "I need a lawyer, a divorce lawyer, the best one you know." Marcus, who had seen it all, didn't ask too many questions. "That bad, huh? Okay, son. I got a name for you, Adana Okoro. She's a shark, and she specializes in cases like ours, pension protection. I'll text you her number. You tell her Marcus sent you." "Thanks, Marcus," Otis said. "I owe you one." "Just keep your head straight, son," Marcus said. "Whatever is happening, the Cranes don't care. Stay focused up there." "I will." He hung up, and a moment later, a text came through with a name and a number, Adana Okoro. He took a deep breath and dialed. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Law offices of Adana Okoro." "Yes," Otis said, his voice steady. "I'd like to make an appointment, as soon as possible. My name is Otis Williams. It's a divorce matter, and I have evidence." What do you think is the most important piece of evidence someone can have in a situation like this? A recording? Financial records? Witness testimony? Let's discuss below. The law office was on the 21st floor of a glass tower downtown, not unlike the one he lived in, but this one felt different. It hummed with purpose, not pretense. The receptionist led him to a corner office with a panoramic view of the Elizabeth River, where a massive container ship was being guided towards his own terminal. Adana Okoro was a tall, elegant black woman in her late 40s. She wore a sharp, tailored suit that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, but she had a kind, intelligent face. Her natural hair was styled in a crown of beautiful, tight coils. She shook his hand firmly, her grip communicating strength and confidence. Her desk was a large, imposing piece of dark wood, but her side of it was neat and organized, while the client's side had a box of tissues and a bottle of water waiting. She gestured for him to sit. "Marcus speaks very highly of you," she said, her voice a warm, melodic contralto. He said it was urgent. "My standard rate is $450 per hour. Is that acceptable?" "Yes, ma'am," Otis said, his heart pounding. "Good. Now tell me everything, and don't leave anything out." For the next hour, Otis talked. He told her about the 7 years, the subtle comments, the escalating pressure, the arguments over his father's house. He told her about the Ghent apartment that cost $2,200 a month and the $43,000 BMW he was helping to pay for. He told her about the contempt she had for his job, for his family, for his life. And then he told her about the fight that morning, about the words, "I never loved you. I never have." Throughout his story, Ms. Okoro listened, her expression neutral. She didn't interrupt. She just nodded occasionally, her eyes fixed on his, taking in every detail. When he was finished, the office was quiet except for the distant hum of the city. "And you said you have evidence?" she finally asked, her voice soft. Otis nodded. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out the cassette tape. He placed it on the polished surface of her desk. It looked small and insignificant against the vast expanse of wood. "My father recorded her 5 years ago," he said. He told me to play it if she ever said that sentence. Ms. Okoro looked at the tape, then back at him. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed her face. Your father was a wise man, she said. She pressed a button on her intercom. Cynthia, could you please bring in the portable cassette player from the evidence room? A moment later, her assistant brought in a small silver Sony device. Ms. Okoro took the tape from Otis, examined the label, and inserted it into the player. She pressed play. The hiss filled the room again, followed by the bright, chilling sound of Yolanda's voice laying out her 10-year investment plan. Otis didn't listen this time. He watched Adana Okoro's face. As the recording played, her neutral expression slowly hardened into a look of cold, professional fury. Her fingers, which had been steepled in front of her, tightened into fists. When the recording ended with the click, she sat in silence for a long moment. She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were like chips of obsidian. Mr. Williams, she said, her voice low and tight with controlled anger. This is not just a divorce. This is a case of fraud in the inducement. What does that mean? It means your marriage was predicated on a material misrepresentation, a lie. She didn't marry you for love, or companionship, or any of the things a marriage is supposed to be for. She married you to gain access to your pension. This tape, she tapped the cassette with a perfectly manicured nail, is what we call a smoking gun. It proves intent. It proves a calculated long-term scheme to defraud you. A wave of validation washed over Otis, so powerful it almost made him dizzy. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't overreacting. It was real. What can we do? He asked. Ms. Okoro leaned forward, all business now. We can do a lot. In a standard divorce, after 7 years of marriage, she'd likely be entitled to a significant portion of the marital share of your pension. It's a major asset. Based on your current salary and years of service, your pension is projected to be worth well over $800,000 at retirement. The marital share she'd be targeting would be worth, conservatively, around $400,000 over time. Otis's stomach clenched. The number was staggering. That was the prize. That was what his life had been worth to her. But this isn't a standard divorce, Ms. Okoro continued, her voice hardening. With this evidence, we will argue that the entire marriage is fraudulent. We will file a petition to have the marriage annulled on the grounds of fraud, or, failing that, to have the court declare that she has forfeited any and all rights to your pension and any other marital assets due to her egregious conduct. She laid out the plan with the precision of a general planning a battle. First, this afternoon, we will go to the bank and you will move your direct deposit to a new individual account. We will also file an immediate motion to freeze all joint assets, including the checking account and any joint credit cards. She'll find out when her card is declined. Otis nodded, a grim satisfaction building inside him. Second, over the weekend, my team will prepare the divorce petition. We will cite fraud in the inducement and attach a certified transcript of this recording as Exhibit A. We will be ruthless. Good, Otis said, the word coming out like a piece of iron. Third, Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, we file the petition with the court. Simultaneously, I will have a process server at your apartment to serve her with the papers. There will be no warning. She will be served, and she will see that we have the tape. That's the coordinated strike. It will throw her completely off balance. Adana Okoro looked at him, her eyes searching his. This will be ugly, Mr. Williams. She will lash out. She will lie. She will try to paint you as the villain. Are you prepared for that? Otis thought of his father's house. He thought of the smell of diesel on his clothes. He thought of the 7 years of feeling small and inadequate. Yes, he said, I am. Good, she said, a small, grim smile touching her lips, because we are going to dismantle her entire plan, piece by piece. She wanted an investment? We're going to make sure it yields a net loss. He left her office feeling like a different man. The fog of shock and grief had lifted, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. He was no longer a victim. He was a man with a plan, backed by a shark. He spent the rest of Friday executing the first steps. He went to the bank and opened a new account. He sat with a teller for 30 minutes, rerouting his paycheck from the port of Virginia. He felt a profound sense of relief as he signed the papers. It was the first step in taking his life back. He didn't go back to the Ghent apartment. He couldn't. He drove to a cheap hotel near the airport, a place with a lumpy bed and a rattling air conditioner, and paid for 2 nights in cash. It was $180. It felt like the best money he'd ever spent. His phone buzzed incessantly. Dozens of texts and missed calls from Yolanda. He read a few of them. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "Otis, I'm scared. Please come home. I'm sorry. I swear I'm sorry. I love you. You're destroying us over one stupid mistake." He read them with a clinical detachment. They were just words, meaningless data. The woman who wrote them was a stranger, an actress playing a part she had long since forgotten. He turned the phone off and slept for 10 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep, for the first time in years. On Saturday, he went to his father's house. He had the key on his chain. He let himself in. The air was stale, but it was a familiar smell. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight slanting through the windows. He walked through the small rooms, touching the old furniture, running his hand along the worn armchair. He went into the backyard. The tomato plants were long gone, but the stakes were still in the ground, waiting. He spent the whole day there. He opened the windows to let the fresh, salty air in. He started a list of things that needed to be done. New paint, sand the floors, fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen. It wasn't a burden, it was a joy. It was work he wanted to do. This house wasn't an asset to be liquidated. It was a legacy to be honored. On Sunday, he met with Miss Okoro again to review the petition. It was a brutal document, laying out the facts in cold, legal language. Reading the transcript of the tape, formatted and notarized, was jarring. It was no longer just a painful memory. It was a legal weapon. Exhibit A. "She'll be served at 9:15 a.m. tomorrow," Ms. Okoro said, sliding the document across the conference table to him. "Are you ready?" Otis looked out the window at the city of Norfolk, at the ships and the cranes and the life he had built with his own 2 hands. "I'm ready," he said. Monday morning, at 9:15 a.m., Otis was sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from his father's house, a cup of black coffee in his hands. He was watching the clock on his phone. Ms. Okoro had told him the process server's name was Frank, a retired cop with a knack for calm delivery in tense situations. Otis pictured Frank walking through the lobby of the Ghent apartment building, riding the silent, swift elevator up to the 12th floor. Yolanda would be there. She had nowhere else to go. Her card would have been declined if she'd tried to buy gas for her BMW. The joint account, which held just over $4,000 they kept for bills, was frozen. She was trapped in the glass box she'd wanted so badly. At 9:17 a.m., his phone buzzed. It was a text from Ms. Okoro. "Subject has been served." Otis closed his eyes and took a slow, deep breath. The strike was complete. The first domino had fallen. In the Ghent apartment, Yolanda, dressed in $200 yoga pants and a matching top, answered the door expecting a package delivery. Instead, she was met by a large, impassive man in a nondescript suit. "Yolanda Williams?" Frank asked, his voice polite but firm. "Yes?" "You've been served," he said, handing her a thick manila envelope. He didn't wait for a reaction. He simply turned and walked away. His job done. Yolanda closed the door, confused. She tore open the envelope. The first page was the divorce petition. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, her heart starting to pound. Irreconcilable differences. Then she saw the other words: fraud in the inducement, egregious conduct, forfeiture of assets. And then she saw the final pages. Exhibit A, the full certified transcript of her phone call with her Auntie May. Every single word she had spoken in her father-in-law's kitchen, laid out in cold, black type. It's an investment. 10 years is the magic number. Half of that is mine. $400,000, $500,000. He actually thinks I love him. Who's ever going to know? The papers slipped from her fingers and scattered across the expensive hardwood floor. A wave of nausea and pure, unadulterated terror washed over her. It wasn't a bluff. He had it. He had it all, and he was using it. Her first call to Otis went straight to voicemail. He was screening her. Her hands shaking, she left a message, her voice high and strained. Otis? What is this? What have you done? You can't be serious. Call me. This is a sick, twisted joke. She waited 5 minutes. No response. She called again. Voicemail. Okay, you want to be a monster? Fine. You think you can just destroy my life? After everything I have given you? After 7 years of putting up with your boring job and your depressing family? You will regret this, Otis. I will fight you. I will get a lawyer, and I will take you for everything you have. She hung up, breathing heavily. She tried to use her credit card to look up lawyers online. Card declined. The reality hit her like a physical blow. The accounts were frozen. She had no money. The BMW in the garage had a tank that was almost empty. She called again, the anger draining away, replaced by a rising tide of panic. Otis, please. Baby, please pick up. That tape, that was a long time ago. I was young and stupid. I didn't know what I was saying. Your father, he was always so mean to me. He must have set me up. It was just talk. It didn't mean anything. I love you. You know I love you, right? Baby, please. Silence. No call back. She was alone in the silent apartment, surrounded by things she couldn't afford, in a life that was evaporating before her very eyes. She tried a different tactic. Justification. You know, I did my time. I was a good wife to you. I stood by you when your father was sick, didn't I? I cooked for you. I cleaned this house. I made a life for us. Doesn't that count for anything? You can't just erase 7 years because of one stupid conversation? An hour later, her phone rang. It was her Auntie May. Yolanda, I just got a call from a lawyer. Some woman named Okoro. She's asking me to give a deposition about a conversation from years ago. What in God's name is going on? Yolanda sank to the floor, the phone dropping from her hand. He wasn't just coming for her, he was coming for the whole lie. He was verifying it, corroborating it, building an ironclad case. Her last message to him that day was just sobbing, a long, incoherent stream of tears and choked-out pleas. It was the sound of a world collapsing. Otis listened to each message in Ms. Okoro's office, his face impassive. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were listening to the soundtrack of a movie he'd already seen. This is predictable, Ms. Okoro said, making notes on a legal pad. The cycle of narcissistic collapse. Denial, rage, bargaining, depression. She's hitting every beat. This is good for us. Let her keep leaving messages. It's all evidence of her state of mind. She looked at Otis, her expression softening slightly. How are you holding up? I'm okay, he said. And to his own surprise, he was. The pain was still there, a deep, dull ache in his chest, but it was manageable. It was dwarfed by the feeling of liberation, of taking back control. What happens now? Now, Ms. Okoro said, a grimly satisfied look on her face, we watch her plan unravel. The consequences cascaded swiftly and brutally. Yolanda hired a lawyer, a flashy downtown attorney who promised her the world. But when Ms. Okoro sent him a copy of the cassette tape and a sworn affidavit from Auntie May, who, under threat of perjury, had confirmed the conversation, the lawyer's tone changed. He advised Yolanda to settle, and to settle quickly. The first consequence was the pension. In a hearing that lasted less than 20 minutes, the judge listened to the core arguments. He reviewed the transcript of Exhibit A. He looked at Yolanda, who sat weeping at her counsel's table, and then at Otis, who sat stoic and silent. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. He found that a clear and convincing case of fraud in the inducement had been made. As a result, he was invalidating any and all community property claims Yolanda might have on Otis Williams' Port of Virginia pension. The net value of that ruling to Otis was estimated at over $400,000. The prize she had schemed for 7 years to win was gone in the bang of a gavel. The second consequence was the apartment. With the joint account frozen and her own funds non-existent, the $2,200 rent for the next month was impossible. Otis, through his lawyer, formally removed himself from the lease. Yolanda was served with an eviction notice. She had 30 days to vacate the premises. Otis saw her a week later, directing 2 movers who were loading her expensive furniture into a truck. The $2,500 sectional sofa, the $800 dresser, the sleek quartz-topped dining table, it all looked cheap and forlorn on the dirty sidewalk of the loading dock. The third consequence was the car. The lease on the $43,000 BMW 3 Series was in both their names, but Otis had been making the $650 monthly payment. Ms. Okoro's office informed the dealership that he would no longer be doing so. 2 weeks later, the car was repossessed from the parking garage of the Ghent apartment building. The fourth consequence was financial ruin. The divorce was finalized quickly, with Yolanda receiving virtually nothing. Since the marriage was deemed fraudulent in its inception, the judge was not inclined to award her spousal support. She was left with her own personal belongings and a mountain of debt. Her lawyer's fees alone came to over $15,000, which she had no way to pay. She had to sell most of the furniture she just moved into a tiny, cramped apartment in a less desirable part of Norfolk, just to cover her legal bills. The final consequence was social. The story, in its broad strokes, got out. The tight circle of friends she had cultivated, the wives of lawyers and financiers, quietly distanced themselves. A woman who would run a 7-year con on her own husband was not someone they could trust. She was a liability. Her social media, once a curated gallery of a perfect life, went silent. Otis watched it all from a distance. He felt no joy, no schadenfreude. He just felt a profound, quiet relief. The relief of a man who has just had a malignant tumor removed from his life. He was free. His own life began to knit itself back together, slowly but surely. He sold the Camry and used the money, along with some of his savings, to buy a reliable 5-year-old Ford F-150 for $28,000. He needed a truck for the work he was about to do. He moved his few belongings out of the hotel and into his father's house. The bungalow in Ocean View became his project, his sanctuary. He spent his weekends stripping the old, yellowed wallpaper, patching the plaster, and painting the walls a warm, clean white. He rented a floor sander for $300 and spent an entire weekend bringing the original hardwood floors back to life, their beautiful oak grain emerging from beneath decades of grime. He fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen himself, watching a tutorial on his phone, a small smile on his face when the drip finally stopped. He was reclaiming his history, his space. He found a box of his mother's old gardening books and started planning for the spring. He would plant tomatoes, just like his father. He kept his job at the port, but his relationship to it changed. He no longer saw it through Yolanda's disdainful eyes. He saw it for what it was: a challenging, essential job that provided him with a good, honest living. The giant cranes no longer felt like just machinery. They felt like extensions of himself, powerful and precise. He took pride in a well-executed lift, in the smooth, perfect placement of a 40-ton container onto a waiting truck. He was a part of a vital, moving world, a world of commerce and industry that Yolanda had never bothered to understand. His work had dignity. He finally allowed himself to feel it. The pain of the betrayal didn't vanish overnight. It lingered, a ghost in the quiet corners of his new life. But it lessened with each passing day, with each board he sanded, each wall he painted, each peaceful sunset he watched from his own small front porch. 1 year later, the bungalow on 12th View Street was transformed. The exterior was painted a handsome slate gray with crisp white trim. The small yard was neat, and in the back, a row of thriving tomato plants, heavy with green fruit, stood proudly in the summer sun. The inside was simple, clean, and filled with light. It was a home. Otis was in the backyard on a Saturday afternoon, weeding the small garden bed when he saw her. Yolanda was standing on the sidewalk in front of the house. He hadn't seen her since the final court date. She looked different, thinner. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a t-shirt. Her hair was no longer an elaborate twist, but pulled back in a simple, unadorned puff. She looked her age. He felt a knot in his stomach, but it wasn't anger or fear. It was just a dull surprise. He stood up, wiping his dirt-covered hands on his pants, and walked to the front of the yard. She flinched when she saw him, as if expecting him to yell. "Otis," she said, her voice quiet. "The house looks beautiful." "Thanks," he said, his voice even. "I did the work myself." An awkward silence fell between them. She wouldn't meet his eyes, instead focusing on a crack in the sidewalk. I got a job," she said. "I'm a receptionist at a dental clinic. It doesn't pay much, but it's a job." "That's good," he said. He meant it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words so soft he almost didn't hear them. She finally looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't calculation or panic. It looked like genuine regret. "For everything. I was a greedy, stupid person. I threw away something good because I thought it wasn't enough. I thought the money was the prize. I was wrong." Otis listened. He didn't say, "I know." He didn't say, "You destroyed my life." He just listened. He thought of the 7 years of lies, the pain, the humiliation, and he thought of the year of healing, of rebuilding, of finding himself in the quiet rooms of his father's house. The anger was gone. Holding on to it was like holding a hot coal, expecting the other person to get burned. His father had taught him that too. "I forgive you, Yolanda," he said, and the moment he said it, he felt the last heavy remnant of the betrayal lift from his shoulders. He wasn't forgiving her for her sake. He was forgiving her for his. It was the final act of his own liberation. She started to cry, quiet, weary tears. "I don't deserve that." "No," he said, not unkindly. "You probably don't, but I deserve to be at peace. Go build a life, Yolanda. A real one this time." She nodded, wiped her eyes, and turned without another word, walking away down the quiet, sun-drenched street until she was gone. Otis watched her go, then turned and went back to his garden. He had weeds to pull. That evening, he sat on his front porch, a cold beer in his hand, and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. On the small table beside him was a flyer for the Port of Virginia's apprentice program. He had signed up to volunteer on Saturdays, to teach a new generation of young men and women the skills he had mastered, to show them the dignity and pride in honest, difficult work. He thought about what his father had told him. Hope ain't a plan, son. But his father had been wrong about one thing. He had planned. He had left his son a map, a weapon, and a path back to himself. True wealth, Otis realized, wasn't a number in a bank account or a pension statement. It wasn't a house in Ghent or a German car. True wealth was the solid foundation beneath your feet. It was the pride in your own two hands. It was the wisdom passed down from a father to a son. And it was the quiet, unshakable peace of knowing who you are and what you stand for, even after the world has tried its best to make you forget. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals don't just break us, they break us open. They clear away the lies we've been telling ourselves and force us to build something stronger and more authentic in their place. If you've ever had to rebuild from the ground up, we see you and we celebrate your strength. Thank you for being a part of our community here on Love Beyond Pride, where every story is a testament to the resilience of the human heart.